Now, Friedman argued that with the real rate, the natural rate, being determined by productivity and thrift, monetary expansion will only raise the nominal interest rate through inflationary expectations. Okay, now given this natural rate of interest, there will also be a corresponding natural rate of unemployment. Monetary policy can only lead to transitory deviations from these natural rates, particularly if capital markets and labor markets are efficient. Now, there's little about credit markets in Friedman or in his successors, the so-called new classical and real business schools. And the most fashionable, or the most, I suppose, mainstream macroeconomic theory, which is called the new neoclassical synthesis, which is really based on the new classical and real business models, with some twists of Keynesian imperfections. They also contain neither money nor finance. And hence, in my view, they're completely useless in explaining the current crisis of providing cures. Now, though Hayek, he provides the best diagnosis of why the crisis occurred, neither he nor Keynes provides an explanation of the financial aspects of business cycles, partly because they assume these were endogenous to the fluctuations in the real economy. Now, here, one has to bring in a very crucial actor who unfortunately has been ditched, partly because he made some very foolish predictions, I think, in 1927. And this is Irving Fisher. Now, Fisher saw the Great Depression. He's really writing about the Great Depression. He described this as a balance sheet recession. And he said this was one of the essential elements. He said there were many other cyclical factors, common to many trade cycles, which lay behind the Great Depression. But to convert these ordinary trade cycles into a Great Depression, you needed two dominant factors. To quote, over-indebtedness to start with, and deflation following soon after. Okay? So like the Austrians, he saw the over-indebtedness as caused by easy money, which is the Hayek theory. So what, in my view, provides a succinct explanation of the current crisis and point us to its cure is the following. What we see is a Hayekian recession with Fisherian consequences. Okay, now Ben Bernanke, he's a great scholar of the Great Depression, and he has absorbed. In fact, he told Milton on his, I think, 90th birthday that he'd read his great work with Anna Schwartz, and he was chairman of the Fed. He'd never make the same mistake again. So I think he's made sure that the second leg of a Fisherian debt deflation will not occur. He's just opened up this sluice gate as far as the money supply is concerned. But both past and present U.S. administrations have failed to adequately restore the balance sheets of over-leveraged banks, firms, and households. Now, in my view, the most urgent need is to restore U.S. banks to health through probably temporary nationalization, as in Sweden in 1992. And the stimulus packages which have been adopted, they fail to adopt the most obvious, simple way of restoring household and firm balance sheets. What we need is a massive across-the-board tax cut accompanied by an equivalent fiscal deficit. And unlike public works, etc., once the economy recovers, effectively, you get growth, you can take this tax cut back. And it has to be across the board, no fiddling with special this. It's across the board. Now, it's been argued, it is argued, whenever one makes this argument, that this extra income will be saved, not spent. But this is completely silly, because this is being bewitched by the wholly inappropriate Keynesian income expenditure analysis, which fails to deal with balance sheets. Okay? If you've got this Fisherian aftermath of a Hayekian recession, which is caused by attempts to reduce unsustainable debt, the savings generated by the tax cuts, and what are they? They are, you reduce the liabilities to the government. So in your check, in your each paycheck, you have this, your net of tax income actually goes up. And that gives you sufficient money, as it were, to pay off your mortgage, credit card debts, and of course, this in turn means that the impairment of bank assets will will not be as much. And you can get this deleveraging then without this downward spiral in income and increased bankruptcies. Now, instead of this, what we've got here, and in the US particularly, we have this dog's breakfast of the Obama stimulus package, which combines reflationary measures plus all sorts of social and all sorts of other measures, which are actually increasing the structural deficit. And what you need here is just a temporary deflationary deficit, but then it should be worked off. And then we have a dubious Geithner plan to clean up the banking sector. This is really like Nero fiddling while Rome burns. So, as we are still in this crisis, and I don't see the end of it, quite honestly. Zombie banks, economies are toddling along at the bottom. You won't get a Great Depression, partly because Bernanke has made sure the second leg of this Fisherian, the debt deflation part, the deflation bit is not going to occur. But the economy will just trundle along as Japan did for 20 years. Okay, now I next want to consider the other question, which of course is hovering in the background. I mean, you can blame governments, you can blame all this. And the answer to this, I think, is who are the winners from this ongoing global financial crisis? And the answer is China, India, and Goldman Sachs. Okay, let's think about the latter. Now, I've worked on developing countries most of my life, political economy, what have you. When you have crises like this, or any other sort of malfunction like that, the first question to ask is, who are the rent seekers who created the crisis and who refused to take the haircut, okay, which in fact would allow the crisis to come to an end and the economy restored to health? Essentially, the haircut means they refuse to do this, given their entrenched sort of vested interest in the polity. That prevents the domestic polity from accepting the obvious cures. And that means that you ultimately have an external agency like the IMF to come and administer the necessary cures. Remember Britain. It's not just third world countries. Remember Britain in the 1970s. And, God forbid, but Mr. Brown is still there and he continues in his ways. We might still be. He might again, like Callahan, be having to call in the fun.